Hi, this is Elisabeth Hancock, host of the Great Awakening podcast. And this week we have Dan Willis, who is a top secret military witness testifying in Washington regarding the extraterrestrial presence and advanced suppressed technologies, a researcher, and also having an exchange with a Pleiadian scientist for over 3 years for part of a science transfer program to our planet. So, hi, Dan. Welcome. Welcome. It's great to have you on here. And as you know, I have lots of questions. But yes, thank you so much for joining us here.
Elizabeth, it's an honor to be on your show. And as you know, I love people who have lots of questions. So many people need to ask more questions.
Yes, and I think everyone has got questions at the moment. This great awakening is definitely in full swing. And everybody has a lot of questions. So, we want to try and make sense of what's going on. We want to try and understand what is happening on the planet now, because so many, negative things have been happening. And we are all beginning to feel that we're moving into a positive energy. And I think that's possibly brought to head a lot of trust issues around, well, are we actually moving into a period of positivity, or is it more smoke and mirrors? And, that's what we're going to be looking at today, amongst many other things. But first, let's just start with, I think you and I both know, and possibly everyone watching this as well, that human consciousness creates reality. And this was suppressed 1957. I know you talk about this in your video. I also have this in my book, my second book as well, that it was suppressed, the information was suppressed about human consciousness creating reality. And this is something which I'm sure that you are trying to get out to the masses. I am also trying to get this out to the masses because we want more people to understand that we have the power. We hold the power. We are the masses. We are the ones creating reality. So let's just start with that. If you can just explain, how do we create reality? How are humans creating reality?
Well, yeah, that's interesting you bring that up. 1957, Professor Heinz Eisnick, he was the professor at the University of London, he wrote a letter insinuating there's a gigantic conspiracy of universities across the planet and highly respected scientists to science the truth about what they knew about the powers of human consciousness to affect reality. Now, why would anybody go to such a gigantic effort to suppress such a thing? When you look at, I know you've done a lot of research into secret societies, and I've done my share as well. The secret societies, they know of the power of collective consciousness. They know of the hive mind that is affected. And science is showing that, we have little things that show, like the double slit experiment and so forth, that consciousness observing reality, it collapses the wave function. To me, it seems obvious that creation is dual in nature, and it's this interaction of this dual nature, the masculine, feminine. We've got these two sides of us. We have these two brains that actually, if you look at it, EEG, they're like two separate beings completely. One scientist I work with, Dr. Robert Beck, he was a specialist in doing brainwaves around the planet of different people who had unique abilities. And when they were in a working state of consciousness, they found that the left and right hemispheres, they would sync together in perfect synchrony, and the amplitude would increase. And it would also lock into the frequency of what's called the Schumann resonance. It's the Earth ionospheric cavity of the planet itself. And this is what I've learned from the Pleiadian scientists that I've been communicating with for over 3 years, that all beings on this planet are in interresonance with the planetary ionospheric resonance. But yes, we are all creative, and I believe that there is a concerted effort in order to hijack our creative power to create realities that are in alignment with certain groups' agenda. And these groups control a lot of our mainstream media. They control a lot of Hollywood. And, you think about it, when you're growing up as a kid, you don't have any reason to question, like your parents are watching television and the news. You have no reason to suspect there's anything that's, being deceptive that's being broadcast. There's thousands of journalists out there, vetting this information to make sure that and that people would be screaming if there was something that was not true. But when you understand the history of how our information systems have been infiltrated and now centrally controlled in order to form the public's perceptions. As you know, this is scientifically, anybody who does a little bit of research finds this is true. So if you have, millions of people watching television or movies or whatever, the mind creates realities. And so when you have millions of minds all seeing a particular reality, you collectively have a force that is creating our collective reality. And this is something that those who want to hijack that reality are very afraid of, that we become aware of that power that we have within us to affect our reality.
Yes, and that's interesting that you bring that up, because I can see that people who 1 year ago who were just not awake, they are now waking up, and they are asking more and more questions. They are questioning reality in a way which I have not seen before. Is this because of the energies rising? So we know that the Schumann resonance has doubled. We've got more and more of these crop circles coming up as well. I think this is all sort of a sign of a shifting frequencies, that frequencies seem to be just rising. And I feel like it's this action which is enabling us to wake up. I know the indigenous tribes talk about this being a prophesized time. When you're connecting with your Pleiadian scientists, is there something happening now that is bringing all this to a head?
Oh, well, we can see it on, social media. There's a whole shift that's happening. Obviously, things are speeding up.
Yeah, they are speeding up. Yes, exactly. Just look at Three Eye Atlas. I've tried feeling into that to understand what exactly is that, and all I can get from it feels like a consciousness. So I know it's changing our collective in some way. Anything that's of that size is going to be changing us in some way. So there's so much that seems to be going on.
I believe it is. My friend and associate Elena, who just recently went to Mars physically, she met with Jen Hanaredian, who is the scientist I've been communicating with for about 3.5 years now, with technical information. They went from the Martian surface over to the Three Eye Atlas, which is it's a spacecraft, and it's huge, and it's a plasmatic consciousness. There's no crew on board. It's billions of years old. When they were there, she went with Prince Ea, who is an Anunnaki prince who has very high level security clearance. That's why they were able to go there. Jenhan had 2 female colleagues in his dome where they're operating, doing their terraforming operations, and they all went to the Three Eye Atlas and kind of connected to it. And it reached out to Jenhan, and interestingly, it had a profound effect on Jenhan. In fact, it brought him to tears. That the being in there is simply said, "I come in peace." And what it is it's billions of years old, and it's an explorer. It's only going through our solar system once, and it's going out to wherever else it's going. And there's like a profound peace, and that peace, we're seeing this now happening, in the Middle East. It looks encouraging that there's peace being brought into that region, because it's only if our planet can be unified in peace that there is such a thing as a Galactic Federation of worlds, as they call it, and hundreds of thousands of civilizations across the galaxy are members of this. And it's a wonderful thing, because if you have not all the ETs are benevolent, beings of light and all this stuff. There are some nasty ones out there. And so when you have some of these nasty ones, which fortunately were purged out of our solar system back in 2021, 2022, they, like a NATO, I guess you could say, they help that world and get rid of the invaders. And so not only that, but when you become a member, you gain access to all their technology, which is, no more Fukushimas or Chernobyls. We won't have pollution. We have medical technology that can cure any disease, extend life, across the board, every aspect of our civilization will be affected if we are able to gain membership. But that's dependent on us because there is such a thing as the prime directive, whereas there is this non-interference clause in the taking in consideration the law of evolution. In other words, if you had children, you know how, you have teenagers and they always getting into mischief, right? But if you try to wrap them in a bubble and try to protect them from every experience like that, they don't get the chance to learn from their mistakes. And so I can see there's a certain wisdom in that, but I know they must feel very frustrated looking at our world, knowing that so many things can be corrective, but it's really up to us to solve our own problems and get to a point where we are a unified planet that is able to go forth in peace.
And I find this interesting because I don't really understand how malevolent species were allowed to interfere with our planet, but benevolent species are not allowed to correct what was interfered with. And I don't understand that logic. I really, really don't.
If you read the Prime Directive, which was interestingly, it was given through the Office of Naval Intelligence to Gene Roddenberry, the script, to seed these concepts, to create a bridge in the collective mind of these realities of teleportation, warp drives, and all this. When you read the Prime Directive, it states that if there is we are at a stage 2 civilization. When you're at a stage 3 civilization, it means that you have achieved interstellar capability and you've made contact with other extraterrestrial cultures on your own. We're kind of in between the two because most of the world that we look at, we're seeing us, going with rockets and or using internal combustion engines and things like that. Where on the other side of the curtain, there has been developed, going back to the 1940s and 50s, advanced technology, alien reproduction vehicles. When I went to Washington in 2001 and testified along with 21 other witnesses, it inspired a hacker in the UK, Gary McKinnon, who discovered the US Navy Solar Warden program, which has been going on, launched back in the 1980s. And then since the year 2000, people have been coming forward claiming they've been recruited into a secret space program using advanced time and age regression technology for a 20-year tour of duty in space and then brought back and then memories wiped. And you have a lot of these people coming forward, which seems like unbelievable science fiction to the average person. So you've got the stage 2 reality on our world, like a Truman Show, I guess you could say. And then you have the stage 3, which is highly advanced. And I believe the Space Force that was created, we're going to start saying, we just created this anti-gravity engine, and we've got this and we got that. And it's kind of way of when people understand the true history of the reptilian races that have been farming our planet, I guess you could say, that goes back actually thousands of years. And the intervention of what happened in 1954, where President Eisenhower was warned about the Orion Greys, that they wanted to basically assimilate our planet. On MJ-12, headed by Alan Dulles' MJ-1, circumvented and signed a treaty with them to abduct millions of people, which they were given underground facilities to create their hybrids. And this whole activity was done to see, they're a hive mind. They all operate from the queen, just like ants and bees and everything. And it would eventually assimilate our planet. So fortunately, they were dismantled, let's say, and the reptilians were working with the Earth Alliance, which is our, I guess you could say, our stage 3 civilization, working with the Galactic Federation of Worlds, remove the reptilians out of our solar system. So now it's just a matter of the Earth minions that are left for us to deal with. They no longer have their upper echelon of their pyramids been decapitated. And I think a lot of people want to see in their hearts, they want to see the world brought to a level of peace. There's so much needless suffering on this planet that can be alleviated.
Yeah, and that there's another bit in there I don't understand, and that is that we can see that we had this technology before the 1930s. We can actually see it. I think there's research now to show that in the 1800s that we were visited in the 1800s. But regardless of that, when you look at the Indian invaders, don't those Vimanas look exactly like UFOs? And these are supposed to be thousands of years ago. You know, before we recorded, we talked about Atlantis and the Atlantean technology. And when you look at Tartaria and the Old World, you can see that they had very advanced technology, which means that this is way before the 1930s. Do you think that there was like a mini reset in there, like a mind control reset in there? Because I know that, you know, they had this flyover over Washington and they literally like just like wiped that from everyone's memory. So people don't actually remember it now. And that also explains
Swamp gas.
yeah, that explains like the Mandela effect and things like this as well. You know, has this sort of mind control reset thing been going on for as long as the reptilians have been here, which I think is 5,000 years ago or something, 6,000 years ago, I believe.
Yeah, it's why, Heinrich Himmler of the Nazis, they sent expeditions out to Tibet and India and things like that. And they were looking at these Brahmanas using these mercury engines, that when it started spinning, it would create an anti-gravity. In fact, it's how they created their Hanabu craft that uses these tool tachyators, I think they're called, the spinning balls of mercury that created the anti-gravity lift effect. Nazi Germany achieved back in 1934 anti-gravity. It wasn't until 1954 the United States, 2 decades later, finally caught up. And this is why they had to enter into a surrender agreement back in 1955 with President Eisenhower. It's
But why has it happened so late? You know, they've been here for 5,000 years harvesting us. We had all this sort of old world technology, which we can, we're told is all built in the 1800s. Why is this happened so much later? Why has it just come out now? Because it seems to me that, I don't know, it just seems very much like we had this old world. It only really disappeared around the 1700s. And then suddenly, like 150 years later, we get space age coming in. It feels to me like it's old technology that's been brought back and rebranded as new technology. And I also would include AI in that as well. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or.
Oh, I have tons of thoughts on that. Yeah, what I've learned from Jen Han, my Palladian scientist I've been communicating with, I've learned certain questions I've asked were actually forbidden by the Prime Directive. They had to get authorization. They planet their power with frill, is what they call it. It's like the life force of the universe.
Is that ether?
Yeah, it's from the ether. Everything's ether in our dimensional bubble that we're in. And this is how they powered Atlantis. So this is not new technology. Eventually, speaking with John Hound, they said that in the they're planning on the Earth colonies to come to Mars in the next 2 years. They're getting the planet ready, working on restoring it back to its original, environment, with atmosphere and everything. And one of the technologies they're going to be bringing forth is the frill technology, which is unlike, we use nuclear, oil, and coal, which is dangerous, obsolete, primitive technologies. The frill energy doesn't need wires to transport it all over the place, ugly wires. Everything is using quantum entanglement to transfer energy wirelessly. Why we are still at this primitive technological level is if you research back documents that were found before the end of World War II show that the Nazis had a plan to infiltrate into the United States. They basically wanted to keep us at a technologically retarded state while they advanced secretly. They went on to colonize the moon, Mars, Ceres, and so forth. With advanced technology and free energy. In the meantime, they had 1951, the Invention Secrecy Act. Anybody, I had 10 years experience with this, Elizabeth, meeting with scientists, inventors around the planet, and it's just a horror movie trying to bring out people come up with brilliant ideas, not extraterrestrial, but just really intelligent people coming up with in their garages or scientists. And what happens is they started this Invention Secrecy Act, which sets up in the U.S. Patent Office a sensitive application warning system that anybody has anything that has to do with free energy, anti-gravity, ways to extend life or increase intelligence, they automatically get what's called a national security order, which states that your invention has been deemed to be a detriment to the United States, to the security of the United States, and therefore you cannot share it with anyone. That is why we continue to use these primitive, obsolete, and when I flew down to the Dominican Republic, we had an inventor that had an energy device producing 500 watts with less than 1 watt going in. He said 2 CIA agents showed up before we landed there. It says, "This works, you're dead," and he disassembled the entire thing. So I could tell so many stories, but let's just say to summate that there's a system in place that keeps us using the technologies that are these primitive, obsolete technologies that I think it's twofold. I think it's not only just about corporate profits. I think it's also about control. It's about keeping our civilization at a certain level that's controllable. Because if we started to have anti-gravity, free energy, and things like that, you would have not the situation you'd have on the world today.
Yeah, but it's just, this TV, the TV has just absolutely killed people's brains, imagination, creativity. Just people believe that reality happens to them. Everybody believes that, and it doesn't. We happen to reality. How do we get people to shift their thinking?
From victim to master.
Yes, and the level of victim, it's so ingrained. It's so ingrained. Even when I get tripped up sometimes, that something happens and I think, oh, bloody hell. And then I think, oh my God, stop thinking like that. Nothing's happening to me. I'm happening to it, And it's so ingrained into us. How do we get the entire planet or world to understand that we are creating reality? We've been herded to create a reality that we're not enjoying, we're not liking. We've had mind control played out on us for at least 80 years. How do we get out of that?
Regarding the media and the Prime Directive and justice and fairness, what actually happened at the end of World War II is that the Nazis did infiltrate into our intelligence agencies. In 1950, Alan Dulles started up Operation Mockingbird. They had 400 media journalists they were paying in order to form the public's perceptions. And around 1983, you had 50 media companies in the United States that were broadcasting. Imagine how difficult it is to try to control 50 companies. And so what the CIA did was they set up these top secret meetings in Sun Valley, Idaho. They brought in all the media, and the objective is to consolidate. And so from 1983 to present day, they consolidated it all down to the control of only 6 media corporations, making it much easier to centrally control. That's why when you watch the media, you'll go from channel to channel, and you'll hear the same verbiage because they're all being given the same talking points. And billions of dollars go into psychological think tanks that help form the public's perceptions toward their agenda. It's not in the interest of the public. In fact, according to, I used to be a broadcast engineer, so I know this well. The FCC regulations forbid any manipulation or slanting or distortion of the news, because in 2013, Obama signed the National Defense Authorization Act, this Schmidt-Mundt Act, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He allowed the use of propaganda against the American public. And so it's legal. And so that needs to be reversed. And the media needs to be held accountable for accurate information to the public and service to the public. And this is what's causing the division, is because you have perceptions being created that are for an agenda. And so we have all this conflicting going on because there's a lot of the people who have just taken it in as this is it. This is the reality. This is the facts. But they don't realize it's being manipulated by psychological think tanks informing their perceptions. This is, myself being an ex-ABC newsman, this was a main thing when I went to Washington and testified. I couldn't believe this, not a world-changing event, what we were disclosing. To the world, it was like 22 cameras in the back row. I saw CBS came down to interview me, and I said, look, I'm not doing this interview unless I could say, because I saw what CNN and the rest of them did, unless I could say we have scientists who can prove we have zero-point energy. We don't need nuclear oil and coal. It's just like a little 10-second statement. And the producer said, I'm sorry, I never had this happen before, but the higher executives made me cut that part out. So I became aware at that point, our media is completely controlled for an agenda that's keeping this information from the public. And as regard, the Galactic Federation of Worlds that was created about 300,000 years ago, but from a collection of all these races from around, when a civilization reaches a certain level of maturity where we are one planet unified in peace, then we can become eligible for membership, and that would allow us to gain not only protection from marauding, nasty extraterrestrials, but also access to all the technology that would completely replace our corrupt medical system, transportation, help our environment, get rid of nuclear oil and coal, so forth and so on. In the Prime Directive, which was written as a kind of a moral basis based on the law of evolution, there are beings that I know in the Federation that are actually kind of frustrated that they know what's going on Earth, and they can see the suffering, and they know that all these things are not right, but only they were able to, if an advanced race, a stage 3 civilization comes in and interferes with a stage 2 civilization who hasn't achieved yet interstellar capability, then the Prime Directive, it's their moral responsibility to come in and correct that. And so they did that with the Orion Greys and the reptilians that were removed back in 2022. But as far as fixing our problems, there's so many problems on Earth that need fixing. There is kind of this law of non-interference to allow us to, like teenage kids, they have to learn through experience and doing naughty things and experiencing the outcome, or else if everybody was put into a bubble, they wouldn't have the experience of learning and working through our problems. So each one of us, as we understand the science of this, we're all connected into a collective mind on this planet. In other words, we're each a fractal. And as you know, with fractals, and you change any part of a fractal, it affects all of the things. So in just us, you and I just discussing this is causing an effect on the collective mind on the planet. And as more people view your show, more people see that, and that affects more. And there's so many people speaking out and talking. And that's why you see it across social media. Things that you would never see, several years ago. People are becoming awake and aware. So to answer the last part of your question, the Galactic Federation of Worlds works toward peace, justice, and balance. They have to allow us to fix our own problems. They've decapitated the negative extraterrestrial control that was on this planet. So now we only have our Earth minions to deal with. They're getting called out all the time. I see more and more in the media. It's very encouraging. People, everybody's waiting when's Gitmo for all these people and everything. But I think we're moving in that direction. It's going to be a victory that we can celebrate, that we, as the people of Earth, saw this BS, called it out, did something about it, transformed it to a better reality for all beings on this planet. It looks like insurmountable, I know, when you think about all the stuff going on and all the hatred and the homeless people and the people starving and all the different things that are going on this planet. I believe we can move toward the direction that all of us in our heart we'd like to see. We'd all like to have a happy life, you know. I know that I know it's possible.
Yeah, I do as well, but I feel that there's still a lot of suppression going on. There's still a lot of mind control going on.
Oh, sure. Big time.
And yeah, and I don't know, how much of our reality is ours, is what we chose, and I don't think there's much of what we chose actually. And and I just want to just bring this back up again, and it's the Star Trek future. The Star Trek future that we've been shown in the movies, and this is what space is, and how much of that is actually true, or how much of that is again being shown. This is your Star Trek future. This is reality, and therefore we create that reality. And I don't think that this has changed. There may be some more positive people pulling the strings, but I think we're still being herded, and we're still being, herded into a reality that's not necessarily ours.
Yeah, they're definitely hurting people. Well, we mentioned earlier about the think tanks, creating perceptions to herd everybody into a particular reality. As truth has this wonderful ability to resonate within all of us. And that thing is that reality is as we perceive it to be. And as you mentioned very, very profoundly, that people are feeling like they're victims of the situations in the world. And how do we get them from realizing that it's a participatory universe? In other words, we all participate in the creation of this universe. And what keeps people in a state of victimhood versus a place of empowerment, if you do not know that such a reality potentially exists, you will stay in the victim level of that this is all there is. We don't have anything. We can only use rockets and our gasoline cars and our electric vehicles or whatever. I have to go get my pharmaceutical prescriptions in order to take care of my physical ailments and everything. There's nothing else. This is the only thing that's approved by the CDC and the Food and Drug Administration and so forth. If you don't realize that medical holographic science is real and it's been used in the secret space program for decades, and I know personally 5 people who are close friends, intimate friends, that have had experience of arms being chopped off, have bodies almost cut in half, that were restored completely using this technology. If people don't realize that this technology actually exists and has been hidden for a long time, that can't exist. So I think education, doing shows like you're doing is so important that I'm working. There's so many conflicting information. A lot of people, the channel information and this and that. And the communication I'm having with my friend Elena is through a quantum communication device that is communicating to Palladian scientists. And I have gathered together a team of very amazing scientists that are taking this information, and we're working to create scientific, credible, verifiable evidence before the world to show that, look, this is something that is real. This is something you can measure. These frequency keys of the octaves of densities of the universe can be put to work to help our planet. And so we're working on and currently doing that because science is important. You have to have credibility. And that's what led me to work with Elena, because she had like 27 different corroborations that, she knew planets that existed in Alpha Centauri 2 years before NASA was able to discover, things you just can't make up. So I felt like there was something valid there. So I pursued that. And I'm glad I did. I had an ET experience back in 1977 with a being called an Emethur. There's 3 extraterrestrial races that have been involved with a science transfer program to our planet. The Emethurs, they're only about 3-4 feet tall. The large heads, they're not grays. They use consciousness contact. And it led me into working with IBM's head scientist, Dr. Marcel Vogel. He's an incredible genius, hundreds of patents, and working with the science of consciousness interfacing with cut quartz crystals, which he was working with medical doctors. And that's what brought me onto Elena's show. And then that's what her contact said, well, I could ask some questions. I was thrilled, here, a scientist that's hundreds of years more advanced than we are, I'd be able to ask him any questions, right? And so the other races are the Umites. The Umites they walk among us. They have their foreheads are a little bigger than ours. They look a little bit different, but they're still acceptable and looking like humans. You have the Alpha Centaurians, they look like us too, but the Emethur look completely different. So they've all been involved with part of ever since the 1940s, a science transfer program to our planet. I'm highly honored that I'm participating in the science transfer program. Anything that can help move us forward to the world that I know can exist, and more people need to understand that this is real. This is not some kind of science fiction, fantasy, make-believe. This is actually having physical contact with advanced cultures that are far more advanced. They live, 700 to 1,000, 1,500 years in age, and they look great. Our mind totally affects our body. The universe is tending toward perfection.
So do you think that Atlantis was really 10,000 years ago, or has time just been altered so much that, timelines are just completely out? I mean, I know we can see that there's been added time of 1,000 years, but I sometimes feel that, it's more like 5,000 years has been added on to the timeline.
Regarding dates and things, your guess is
They
good as
don't
mine,
add up,
right?
do they? Yeah.
But referencing Elena does have access to people who have historical knowledge of the dates and things when things happened. And in her book, The Cedars, it's around 9,600 years ago, I believe. Atlantis, and what happened was a reptilian being that didn't like what was going on. He threw a meteorite into the northern part of the planet that create the devastation of Atlantis that destroyed Atlantis. And you look back, it was like 360,000 BC when the Cedars, I guess, evolved this planet. At the very beginning, it was reptilians that were like the Naga that were running this planet, and then a group called the Cedars that they seed planets, basically. There was a primate it was evolved. It had like 12 DNA strands, and then what happened was it had incredible potential, but the Anunnaki reptilian guy that decided they needed a slave race, and I wanted to keep us dumb and shorten our lifespans. They manipulated the strands and keep us short, so we have the short lifespans that we do. Normally, if you look back in the book of Genesis, you have people living over 900 years old. So originally we should be living, 900,000 years old, but our DNA has been manipulated. But my understanding is that since he was, essentially brought to trial and put on a prison planet, his brother, people, Inky, Enel, situation, basically has given the original codes to be put into the med beds, which Elena actually went to the moon and saw within. The moon is not what we think. It's hollow. It has facilities inside of it. And there's thousands of these med beds ready to be released. It's put the coding in that we can have back the original coding that was robbed from us because of this reptilian. And he had to do with a lot of our religions, because you have these blood sacrifices and the people being wiped out and things like that. Yahweh, there was Jesus was, well, that's a touchy one. The God of Jesus was different than this guy, who was doing different things. So you have to wonder, it's like wise men following a star at night and a cloud by day, and then Mary having an immaculate conception, all these things, there's like, and then you have these people who have, taken out so many parts of the Bible and rewrite the other parts. And I love what Thor Hanaredian said about worshiping, about when you worship source, it's a product of, it's a product of unawareness, because we are all fractals of source. And so source does not worship itself. We are all fractals of the same essence. So it's like worship is a product of like controlled ignorance. The humans are like that. They like to control people. And so you've got our earth religions, that have perpetuated certain ideas that are of a separation of something out there and is different than in here, which is not true. That's false. We are all fractals of one source.
I know. But you know what? My son, he went to see the Vatican a couple of days ago, and I saw these videos, and they're all recording the Pope coming by in his armored car with security guards all around him. All you have to do is look at this man, or whatever he is, to see that this is not anything to do with God or love.
Clever of them to take over the schools. You have all these little Catholic schools, and get them when they're young, right? It's like Hitler said, give me a child up to 7 years old and he's mine forever. When you indoctrinate early, you embed certain concepts. And so you for the rest of your life, you have these concepts in your mind, and they're wonderful, good people, following concepts that they believe in their heart is, true.
And how did the church get so huge? Because they're reptilian. They're Draco reptilians.
Apparently, those little lizard people had a hand in all this. Yes, indeed. As William Tompkins, is a very credible Navy witness. It was like they've been controlling our planet for about 6,000 years. Fortunately, we had some help. They were doing horrific things that you don't want to say on your show, or else they'll get banned. To people, small people, and doing it for a long time.
So if they've been around here for 5,000, 6,000 years, then everything that we see in our modern day history has been created by them. All the wars, all the rituals, all the sacrifice, just the sacrifice alone in the Aztecs, murdering up to 250,000 people a year at one point. So all of it, everything is being engineered by them.
Yeah, they've been, farming our planet, we eat cattle, and, they eat us and they enslave us and all kinds of nasty things. And it works together with the Nazis. Heinrich Himmler wanted to have, according to Albert Speer, in his book Infiltration, Heinrich Himmler wanted to have an empire of slaves. And as we know, that forensic evidence shows that his double didn't take the cyanide cap. He took the cyanide cap. He didn't have the fencing scar on his cheek. So Hitler and Himmler, they both, escaped, as the JFK files revealed. Yeah, it's interesting that William Tompkins, back when my father actually worked in the same division at the Naval Air Station in San Diego, where William Tompkins was meeting with these 29 Navy spies that were embedded into the Nazi secret space program, that he was an information disseminator. We were attempting to catch up with their technology, and some of it was like hieroglyphs and stuff, and he had the secretaries. He'd meet with the admiral. Now, Admiral Rick Oboda, who was in charge of it, James Forrestal picked him because he did not go, he was what they call a Mustang. He worked up from the ranks. He did not go to Annapolis and did not go through the normal indoctrination of education. So he was perfect for the job, because, as William Tompkins says, that all of our information is basically compromised. It's disinformation. And if you understand that a lot of the science, if you get into certain areas of science, all of a sudden you'll find out your grant will be canceled. There's always an effort in order to keep us at a certain status quo.
Keeping our consciousness down here so that but our consciousness is rising or expanding, as I sort of feel. I feel like it's expanded beyond the planet, whatever. I don't know what that means, but that it feels to me like it's expanded to galactic consciousness. Again, I don't know what quite that means. That's what it feels like to me. So maybe that's why we're now sort of waking up to, galactic space and all these different things. Would you say that this is just like a prophesized time period, or would you say that actually it's because we've had help and the Dracos have been kicked off, the Greys have been kicked off the planet, and that's why it's happening now?
Yeah, addressing the element of time is something I'd like to discuss with you. One thing that John Hannah shared with me is that using the simple power of our minds, our consciousness affects the planet. The planet rises when our consciousness rises. The planet is, as you know, a living being, and we're interfaced with the planet. Our bodies are made up, our DNA is in resonance with the planet. Like he described when he's on his brother's ship, he's in resonance with his planet, which is in the Pleiades on the planet Era. So no matter where he is in the universe, he has this quantum resonance with his planet, and our bodies have the same with Earth. And as far as timeline, that's fascinating to me. One project I worked on with Dr. Marcel Vogel was a fascinating device that we had imported from England. It was built in the 1950s by the Delaware Laboratories. It was patented in Paris, France, 1955. Thousands of photos were made with it, so it was real. It's definitely, unquestionably, it worked. It was a radionic device, which is like a consciousness-assisted type of instrument, and it could tune forwards and backwards into time. For example, a woman was pregnant, was 50 miles away, had a drop of blood, and the drop of blood is like a fractal of her entire being. Not only every organ and every aspect of her body, but also going backwards and forwards into time. So she was pregnant. You could see the pregnancy on the film, and then it can move forwards and backwards into time. As you move forward in the time, you could see the different levels of the pregnancy changing as the baby's, becoming larger and larger. And, it did this also with a seed of a lily flower, where just in the seed is contained the future bulb and flowering cycles. You could see that in the images. And this, this was primitive, highly primitive technology that was developed on Earth, but nevertheless substantiated that through the holographic field can be tuned through in time. And my friend Alex Collar, who's an Andromedan contactee, they showed him how the medbeds work. And what it does is basically it tunes through the holographic field of time, and it pulls out slides in time when your lungs were best, your brain, your every aspect of your body was optimal. It takes that and creates a holographic projection that overlays onto your current. And since, as Jen Hannah shared with me, the universe tends toward perfection, a resonant template dominates over a dissonant template, and it morphs into that. And that's how these people in these 20 and back programs, where at the end of 20 years, they resonate that template that was back when they were 17 years old, and it morphs them back into that 17-year-old body. And they also have the time regression technology that brings them back to within a few minutes of the point of enlistment, and then, wipe their memory as if nothing ever happened. But as what seems to happen is, like, as 20 years goes along on this timeline, they start to have total memory recall of their service in space, and so many of them are coming out. Elena went on board a Metaton ship, and there was a time-looking device, and she was able to look 20 years into the future, and it was a beautiful reality. Earth was like renewed. Nature had more predominant. It was advanced technologies. It was a beautiful world just 20 years in advance. And I've heard this from more than one source that, I asked Jen Han about time, about these timelines. I said, if there's a good reality in the future, something happened, how does this whole thing work? And what it is there's a set timeline that's going to happen, but the way of getting there is an infinite number of variables to get there. And so in the future, it looks good, but getting there is, all these different variables can come in and come into play. And we are in control of those variables by our creative thinking as we become aware and educate ourselves of the reality of a Star Trek future, which is a possibility. When we know that, then, and we see that in the world, we help create that reality. What we see in our mind's eye and know has a creative effect on the global collective reality that we all experience. And here's a story I'll tell you about the power of. Dr. Marcel Vogel was researching water, and he got this vial from a sacred spring in where it was Hungary or Romania or something. But he took a thing of bulk water, a big thing of it, and he put one drop of that bulk water, and it had an incredible high charge on it. Then every drop in that whole bulk water took on that same charge. In other words, goes along with what I've learned from Jenhan, is that the higher frequency affects the lower. The lower does not affect the higher. And so when you have thoughts that are based on truth, that are resonant with love, when you have love, it has a transcending ability to go into the higher levels. And it's at this higher level that how creation comes into form. Anyway, I could go into quite a bit of detail on that, on how creation comes into formation, into the physical reality, from what I've learned in the densities of creation and the geometry of it, and how it comes into the morphogenic keys of the universe into physical reality. Yes, it's these new sciences that take into consideration how the universe is constructed. I feel like I'm at a kindergarten level compared to what the level of Jenhan. He graduated from the university in the Pleiades, and then to be a star maker, which is their term to be a terraformer, and then he has his first assignment on Mars. Yeah, it's interesting, the flower of life is actually kind of the basic construct of how all the universes are fit, but because the universes are all in this framework that are in what's called the Great Void. In the void, there is no time and space. It's, void, And so being void of time and space, it's in this nonlinear space. And so you have all these varieties, you have all these variations of different universes. They all like in the flower of life, where you see these overlapping bubbles, one into the other like that. They're like that. In our particular bubble, we have 12 densities that emanate from creator source, all the levels are all part. There's no separation in creator source. It's all part of one thing,
So we have our own source inside our own bubble, and then there are other sources, or is it just one source?
There is one source, and that source is everything. There is no separation. There's no multiple sources. There is one source, and it all seems to come from, with their technology. I've learned, like I have a interesting device here, if you can see. It's a crystal with two silver electrodes. What it is these two vortices that are formed by the angles of the crystals. One's a 51.843 degree angle, same as the Great Pyramid, and the other is a 60-degree angle. Every angle on a tetrahedron is 60 degrees. And so what you have is two vortices that are spinning in opposite directions that are coming together. It's almost like if they were both at the same speed exactly, they would cancel each other out completely. But you have to have this offset. And what happens is a singularity vortex comes into he calls it the geometric point of transfluxation that happens in this vortex that opens up a singularity. And when the singularity opens, the silver electrodes are pulsing, by the way, the crystal lattice structure, so that it opens the singularity. And when that happens, frill comes from it. Frill comes from the singularity. There's different ways to do this. They power their planet using I don't have an example right now, but there's like coils that are of copper and silver that are perpendicular at 90 degrees that are pulsed at a particular frequency that opens up a double coiled torsion field that releases this frill, and they have pyramids on their planet that it transpons this to all their devices to power everything on their planet. This particular device is more for, I call it a reality transflux modulator, because reality can be modulated because the holographic field is tetrahedral in structure. And so the angle of the crystal that's the 60-degree writes into, with resonance, into the holographic field. The other end brings in it's like a harvester, I guess you could say, of frill, just like the Great Pyramid is. And when these two come together, you can modulate with your consciousness that singularity vortex to affect reality. And they use this technology quite a bit. Anyway, there's different offshoots of this consciousness assisted technology that we're developing.
So I remember I asked you before, so consciousness is a technology, yeah? It's not a living thing.
Well, when we think thoughts, and just as Dr. Marcel believed, our thoughts are geometric in pattern. They're complex geometrical patterns. And we, just like a master in the Far East, visualize an apple on his hand, clearly see it. In fact, if you go to marcelvogel.org, a site I did in Marcel's honor, he gives an exercise of how to create something out of the ethers into your hand. Is sort of an exercise in doing this. You can recreate yourself, if you want, using this technology. And, I was pulling out of his mind ways that people could use for healing. There's so many people. Marcel Vogel used quartz crystals that were cut, and he would have loved to have this information that I have now. And so I was wanting to develop crystals that were cut to this specific geometry that people could use to heal themselves, and heal others with their permission. You always have to ask permission, and be something practical, because, so many people could use healing.
I totally agree. I actually am an energy healer, and I often wonder about the people that don't heal, and I don't understand why they don't. I think it's belief structures and, programs and all sorts of things.
You have to be willing. The person has to be willing to let go. When Marcel Vogel did healing on people, the first time I met with him, he dematerialized physically a tumor in front of a doctor and myself, which made a huge impression on me. And I've seen many people have, if they were willing to relinquish what it is that was bothering them, is easily accomplished. Basically, you weren't doing the healing; they were basically healing themselves, and you were facilitating them in their process of healing themselves. And so, you can't force somebody to be healed, if they don't want to be healed. So, it has to be, the person has to be willing.
I know, but how, if they think that they want to be healed, they 100% believe that they want to be healed, and yet they're not healing. So I know that there are beliefs and programs and all sorts of things in there, and the subconscious mind, it holds on to the illness if it perceives it's benefiting from it in some way, but I've worked with people who have just worked on everything.
There's layers. What Marcel was doing when he was doing science that we're developing is a whole, we're actually altering the fabric of the holographic reality with the technology that we're getting into, which Marcel did too, but in a different way. It just wasn't as effective. But what happened was people had situations, sometimes one surface situation was actually tied to another deeper situation that needed to be dealt with. And so until you get to the core, the absolute core issue, it perpetuates. I think it's the DNA of my great-grandfather that would like to see the medical system transformed into a new era of medical care for people that uses these new modalities, that takes into account the energetic formative aspect of the holographic field that creates our body. It's cruel, and I would have to say evil, that they allow the suffering when technology has been hidden that could alleviate this, and that's why I do shows and stuff. I have no interest in anything other than just to help more minds that these things are real. They're not like some science fiction that I thought was science fiction for a long time until I started really becoming aware and researching thoroughly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that the holographic medbed technology sounds completely logical and doable. I don't, like, why wouldn't it work, And, the more I discover about the holographic field, I mean, it just makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
So, and I do think I agree with you. I think that they are coming. They are. And I don't know, I think they're probably even already here on some level.
They are in military bases. Like my friend JP, he went to a military base over in Florida. He said he felt like he was 20 years old again, when he went through it. Yeah, Elena has been on a med bed. My friend Tony Rodriguez, he, the poor guy, he got into the wrong 20 and back program because he pissed off the wrong person. Um, yeah, they were using him on Mars against these insectoid creatures that, chopped his arm off and the other one bit his foot off, and he said he felt like $1 million after they, put him back together again. And my other friend, John Charles Moyen, he is in the French section of the Solar Warden program on Mars up against a huge black Draco that his tail whipped and cut his body almost completely in half and was put into a med bed and reformed him. So there's so many different accounts of people who've experienced this technology that when it makes sense, because everything is contained within the holographic field. Marcel Vogel used to say we're made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore we create. And he also used to say that everything hinges around suggestion. So you and I are doing this show together. We're planting seeds in minds that are creative. And so
we are shaping reality, just like Gene Roddenberry has created
exactly.
Star Trek Future. He has created it. We've seen all of those, zillions of different series, episodes, movies, and that's how we perceive space now.
Yes, it created a bridge for that future reality in the collective mind of the entire planet. You have all these Trekkies wearing their Trek outfits and stuff. It took off, because there's something to it.
Truth resonates. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, there's like something in science fiction, that we knew there's something real about this. When I was a kid watching science fiction movies, I didn't realize the real thing was going on, behind the scenes. Watching, Forbidden Planet and Day the Earth Stood Still and all these different, the 50s, that the actual reality was going on while we're being fed science fiction to kind of expand our concepts of what could be real. The real reality was hidden behind the curtain.
Our discernment understands, like, little sort of like beeping alarm is saying, oh yeah, that one feels right, that one resonates. And it's the same when we watch the Lord of the Rings in movies and stuff. We're like, oh yeah, I seem to recognize that, and that I remember that.
Exactly. It's like truth has this way of resonating within all of us. And so we see little bits and pieces of that truth, and it attracts us to want to watch that movie or find it entertaining, because there's something on a level that is speaking to a truth.
Yes, and I remember talking about this before, actually, is that they have to, when they do the films and things, they have to put a certain amount of truth in. Otherwise, we would not resonate with it.
You take it, for example, the movie Independence Day and the evil aliens, that are coming in. And it's funny, the extraterrestrial species that they pick for being the evil alien who's saying, I want you to die, happens to be a Nigumek, who happens to be now a member of the Galactic Federation. They're scary looking creatures, but they are actually nice people. But they are the nemesis of the reptilians because they hunt them and they eat them. And so the reptilians are scared to death of them. And so now they have joined the Galactic Federation. And so, there's only a few marauding of the Sakaar Empire reptilians that are out there in our system. They attempted back some time ago to enter into our solar system, but they were defeated. So we're in good hands. So we just need to clean up our planet. That's all. The humans, we don't have any extraterrestrials to deal with. They've been handled. We have to deal with the humans on this planet.
Human hybrids.
Yeah, those, yes, and those too. Yeah, the 13 bloodline families and all that.
Yeah, so they originate from the reptilian, the Anunnaki bloodline. And is this the Enlil bloodline? I always heard that there was another 13 families and they originated from the Enki bloodline as well.
Right, which is, Jesus and Mary and
Mary Magdalene. And yeah. Okay, I have kept you for over 2 hours. I'm so
Are you kidding me? We've been talking for 2 hours. Are you kidding? Oh my God, we went through some time warp, didn't we? That's incredible.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to you.
Oh, I'd love to do that. Yeah, I'm very privileged to be able to, Elaine has been extremely gracious to work with me for like 3.5 years, and my team of scientists. I mean, if Elaine is making it up, she's this incredible scientific genius that has given information to me that I'm working with that's being validated with scientists that I'm working with. So, this quantum, the story what happened was they had to repurpose this implant that the Greys put in there. And so we had this unusual opportunity to create a communication bridge between the Galactic Federation and people of Earth. Well, let's just hope this show today would plant a little seed to move us closer to that reality.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and it's been a true honor and a pleasure. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.